The champagne glass slipped from my trembling fingers, shattering against the marble floor of the Riverside Country Club. But nobody noticed the broken crystal. Every eye in that grand ballroom was fixed on General Harrison Mitchell as he stood at rigid attention, his decorated uniform gleaming under the chandeliers, saluting me with the kind of respect reserved for the highest military command. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Supreme Commander, ma'am, his voice carried across the suddenly silent room. It's an honor. Just 30 minutes earlier, these same people had been laughing at me, whispering about the loser sister, who couldn't even afford a decent dress for her own sibling's wedding. My name is Rebecca Torres, and I should probably start from the beginning, because what happened at my sister's wedding that Saturday evening in October changed everything, not just for me, but for everyone who thought they knew who I was. The morning started like any other disaster in my life. I stood in front of my tiny apartment mirror, staring at the only semi-formal dress I owned, a navy blue number I'd bought at a thrift store 3 years ago for my college graduation. The fabric was starting to pill, and there was a small stain near the hem that I'd tried unsuccessfully to remove with every household remedy imaginable. But it was all I had, and my sister Elena's wedding was in 6 hours. Elena had always been the golden child. Straight A's through high school, full scholarship to Northwestern, graduated summa cum laude with a business degree, and now she was marrying Ryan Caldwell, whose family owned half the commercial real estate in Chicago. Their engagement announcement had made the society pages of 3 different newspapers. Me? I was the sister who dropped out of college after 2 years, worked a series of dead-end jobs, and currently spent my days answering phones at a small insurance office for $12 an hour. This sister who lived in a studio apartment above a Korean restaurant, where the smell of kimchi permanently clung to everything I owned. This sister had to choose between paying her electric bill and buying a wedding gift. I chose the electric bill. The ceremony was beautiful, of course. Elena looked radiant in her custom Vera Wang gown, walking down the aisle of St. Catherine's Cathedral while a string quartet played Pachelbel's canon. Ryan waited at the altar in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, tears in his eyes as he watched his bride approach. Their love was the kind you see in movies. Pure, uncomplicated, destined. I sat in the 3rd row, trying to make myself invisible, while Elena's sorority sisters filled the seats around me. They were all successful now, lawyers, doctors, marketing executives, dressed in designer cocktail dresses that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I recognized most of them from Elena's social media posts, weekend trips to Napa Valley, dinner parties in Lincoln Park penthouses, charity galas, where they raised money for causes I'd never heard of. "Oh my God, is that Rebecca?" I heard Madison Phillips whisper to her seatmate. Madison had been Elena's maid of honor, and we'd never gotten along. I barely recognized her. What is she wearing? The whispers followed me from the cathedral to the country club reception. I tried to find a quiet corner where I could eat my dinner in peace, but everywhere I went, conversation seemed to stop when I approached, then resume in hushed tones after I passed. "I heard she's been working at some tiny insurance place," someone said behind me. Elena told me she had to move back in with their parents last year because she couldn't make rent. Such a shame. Remember how smart she used to be in high school? That last comment stung the most, because it wasn't entirely wrong. I was smart in high school, valedictorian actually. Early admission to Stanford, with plans to study aerospace engineering. Elena used to brag about having a genius for a sister. But life has a way of derailing even the best laid plans. The turning point came during the cocktail hour, when I found myself standing alone near the bar, nursing a glass of wine I couldn't really afford to be drinking on an empty stomach. The bartender, a kind-faced man in his 50s, had given me a sympathetic smile when I'd asked for the house wine instead of the premium options everyone else was ordering. "Beautiful ceremony," he said, polishing a glass. "Yes, it was," I replied, grateful for someone who didn't seem to be judging the wear patterns on my 3-year-old dress. That's when Ryan's cousin Derek approached. I'd met Derek once before at the engagement party, where he'd spent most of the evening trying to impress everyone with stories about his job at Goldman Sachs. He was the kind of person who name-dropped restaurants and vacation destinations like they were Pokemon cards. "Rebecca, right?" Derek said, sidling up to the bar with the confidence of someone who'd never been turned down for a credit card. "Elena's sister?" "That's me," I said, forcing a smile. "So what do you do for work these days?" The question sounded casual, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. He already knew I wasn't part of their world, and he was looking for confirmation. "I work in insurance," I said, which was technically true. "Oh, interesting. Which firm?" "My buddy Jake just became a partner at Marsh & McLennan." "It's a smaller company," I said, hoping he'd drop it. He didn't. "Local? Regional? What kind of coverage do you specialize in?" I could feel my cheeks burning. "Auto and home insurance mostly. It's not very exciting." Derek's smile turned predatory. "Oh, so like customer service? Taking calls from people who've been fender benders?" Before I could respond, he turned to flag down two of his friends. "Hey guys, come meet Elena's sister. She works in insurance. Answering phones when people crash their cars." The laughter that followed wasn't mean-spirited exactly, but it wasn't kind either. It was the laughter of people who'd never had to worry about making rent, who'd never had to choose between groceries and gas money, who'd never understood that sometimes life forces you to take whatever job you can get, just to survive. "That's actually really important work," said Derek's friend Marcus, but his tone suggested he was just being polite. "I mean, someone has to do it, right?" More laughter. More whispers. I excused myself and found refuge in the ladies' room, where I spent 10 minutes staring at my reflection and wondering if I should just leave. Elena wouldn't miss me. She was surrounded by her new husband and his family, basking in the glow of her perfect day. I was just the disappointing sister in the corner, a reminder of paths not taken and dreams deferred. But something stopped me from leaving. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was the small voice in my head that whispered, I had every right to be there, celebrating my sister's happiness despite what anyone else thought of my life choices. So I returned to the reception, found an empty table near the back, and tried to enjoy what was left of the evening. The band was good, a jazz quartet that played everything from Sinatra to contemporary covers. The food was excellent, though I ate sparingly, conscious of every bite in a room full of people who seemed to exist on champagne and small talk. That's when I noticed him across the room, a distinguished man in his 60s, wearing a military dress uniform, decorated with ribbons and medals I didn't recognize. He was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of posture that suggested a lifetime of discipline and command. He stood near the head table, talking quietly with Ryan's parents, occasionally glancing around the room with sharp, assessing eyes. Ryan's father-in-law, I realized. General Harrison Mitchell. Elena had mentioned him in passing. Ryan's mother's father, a career military man who'd served in multiple overseas deployments. Retired now, but still active in Veterans Affairs and military consulting. What I didn't expect was for those sharp eyes to find mine across the crowded ballroom, or for him to excuse himself from his conversation and begin walking directly toward my table. I straightened in my chair, suddenly self-conscious about my posture, my dress, my entire presence in this room full of people who belonged here in ways I never would. General Mitchell moved with purpose, his expression unreadable, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to be questioned about my right to be at this wedding. Instead, he stopped 3 feet from my table and did something that changed everything. General Mitchell came to a complete stop and executed a perfect military salute, crisp, formal, unmistakably respectful. The kind of salute reserved for superior officers. Supreme Commander, ma'am, it's an honor to finally meet you in person. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. The jazz quartet continued playing, but their music suddenly seemed to come from another universe. I sat frozen, my fork suspended over my dinner plate, as General Mitchell maintained his salute. Around us, heads began turning, whispers starting to buzz through the crowd like electricity. I'm sorry, I managed to say, my voice barely audible. I think you might have me confused with someone else. General Mitchell lowered his salute, but remained at attention. Commander Rebecca Torres, call sign Phoenix, formerly of the 177th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. Unless I'm mistaken, you're the pilot who extracted my son's unit from Kandahar province 3 years ago. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The room had gone completely silent now. Even the band had stopped playing, sensing something significant was happening. I could feel dozens of eyes boring into me, including Elena's shocked stare from the head table. "Your son?" I whispered. "Captain James Mitchell, Army Rangers. You flew him and 7 other soldiers out of a hot landing zone under heavy Taliban fire. When his helicopter went down, you were the pilot who volunteered for the rescue mission that everyone else said was impossible." My hands started shaking. Those memories, the ones I'd spent 3 years trying to bury, came flooding back with painful clarity. The emergency call came in at 03:00 hours. The briefing lasted exactly 4 minutes because there wasn't time for more. The flight through the mountain passes in a dust storm, with tracer rounds lighting up the sky around my Black Hawk. "General Mitchell," I said quietly, standing up from my chair, "your son is a good soldier. My son is alive because of you." His voice carried across the silent ballroom. He told me what happened that night. How you flew 3 separate rescue runs into that valley. How you stayed on station for 40 minutes under constant fire, refusing to leave until every soldier was accounted for. Derek appeared at my elbow, his face pale with confusion. "Wait, what's happening here? Rebecca, what is he talking about?" I didn't answer him. I couldn't. Because standing there in my thrift store dress, surrounded by people who'd spent the evening treating me like a failure, I was suddenly back in the cockpit of a UH-60 Black Hawk, flying through hell to bring 8 American soldiers home. General Mitchell continued, his voice growing stronger. "The Silver Star you were awarded for that mission, it was the recommendation I personally wrote and submitted, though I understand you never attended the ceremony." "I was recovering from injuries," I said simply. "Injuries sustained when shrapnel from an RPG tore through your cockpit during the final extraction. You flew that helicopter for another 12 minutes with a piece of metal embedded in your shoulder, refused medical attention until every soldier was safely aboard." The crowd around us had pressed closer, hanging on every word. I could see Elena pushing through the group, her wedding dress rustling as she moved, her face a mixture of shock and something that looked like pride. Madison Phillips stood 3 feet away, her mouth literally hanging open. The same Madison who'd been whispering about my cheap dress an hour earlier now looked like she'd seen a ghost. "I don't understand," Derek said, still trying to process what he was hearing. "Rebecca works at an insurance company. She answers phones." General Mitchell turned to look at Derek with the kind of expression that could freeze water. Commander Torres served 4 tours of duty in Afghanistan as a special operations pilot. She flew missions that most seasoned combat veterans wouldn't even attempt. She saved lives that other people had written off as lost. "But she dropped out of college," Marcus said weakly. "She left Stanford after her sophomore year to enlist in the Army," General Mitchell corrected. "Graduated top of her class from flight school at Fort Rucker, Alabama. Volunteered for every dangerous assignment that came down the pipeline." Elena finally reached us, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Becca, is this true, all of this?" I looked at my sister, my beautiful, successful sister, who'd always been the pride of our family, and nodded. "It's true. But why didn't you ever tell us? Why didn't you tell anyone?" That was the question I'd been dreading for 3 years. The question that had no easy answer, because how do you explain that sometimes coming home is harder than staying in the war zone? How do you tell people that the skills that make you exceptional in combat don't necessarily translate to success in civilian life? "Because I didn't know how," I said finally. "When I came back, I tried to fit into the world I'd left behind, but everything had changed. Or maybe I had changed. The things that used to matter to me, the career plans, the social expectations, the need to impress people, none of it seemed important anymore." I looked around the room at all these successful, accomplished people who'd spent the evening treating me like a charity case. I took the job at the insurance company because it was quiet. Because I could help people with their problems, small problems that didn't involve life or death decisions. Because after 4 years of carrying other people's lives in my hands, I wanted to do something simple. General Mitchell's expression softened slightly. PTSD? Among other things, I admitted. Adjustment disorder, some physical issues from the injuries. The VA helped, but the transition back to civilian life was challenging. It always is, he said with understanding, especially for pilots. The adrenaline, the responsibility, the brotherhood. It's hard to find that same sense of purpose in the civilian world. Derek looked like he was still trying to reconcile the woman he'd been mocking with the combat veteran standing in front of him. So you're saying Rebecca is like a war hero? I'm saying, General Mitchell replied with military precision, that Commander Torres is one of the finest soldiers I've ever had the privilege to know. The kind of person who volunteers for missions that other people won't even consider. The kind of pilot who brings everyone home, no matter what the cost. Ryan appeared beside Elena, taking her hand. Rebecca, I had no idea. Grandpa Joe never mentioned. I asked him not to, General Mitchell interrupted, when James told me his sister-in-law was Elena Torres, and that she had a sister named Rebecca who'd served in Afghanistan. I suspected it might be the same pilot. But I wanted to confirm before saying anything. Military records, especially for special operations, aren't exactly public information. So you checked up on me? I asked. I made some calls, spoke to your former commanding officer, Colonel Sarah Washington. She had nothing but praise for your service record. Said you were the kind of pilot who made impossible missions look routine. The crowd around us had grown larger, but somehow it felt less oppressive now. Instead of judgment, I saw curiosity, respect, even admiration in their faces. These people who'd treated me like a failure an hour ago were now looking at me like I was someone worth knowing. But it wasn't their approval that mattered. It was the look on Elena's face, the tears in her eyes, the pride in her expression, the way she was seeing her sister for the first time in years. Why didn't you tell me? She whispered again. Because I didn't want to overshadow your success, I said honestly. You built something beautiful with your life. You found love, built a career, created the kind of future our parents always dreamed of. I didn't want my war stories to complicate that. Elena stepped forward and pulled me into a hug that threatened to wrinkle her expensive wedding dress. You idiot, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You're my sister. Your stories don't complicate anything. They make me proud. Around us, the crowd began to applaud, slowly at first, then building to something that filled the entire ballroom. General Mitchell stepped back and saluted again, this time joined by 3 other military personnel I hadn't noticed earlier, guests who'd recognized what was happening and wanted to pay their respects. But the evening was far from over, because as the applause died down and conversations began to resume, I noticed something else happening around the room. People were approaching, not with pity or condescension, but with genuine interest and respect. The real revelations were just beginning. The first person to approach was someone I'd never expected. Drive. Amanda Chen, one of Elena's medical school friends who'd become a trauma surgeon at Northwestern Memorial. She'd barely acknowledged my presence earlier, but now she walked directly toward me with purpose. Rebecca, I need to ask you something, she said, her voice urgent with professional curiosity. The injuries General Mitchell mentioned, were you treated at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany? I nodded, surprised by the specificity of her question. January 15, 2021? Multiple shrapnel wounds, emergency shoulder surgery? My blood went cold. How could you possibly know that? Dr. Chen's eyes lit up with recognition. Because I was part of the surgical team that operated on you. I was doing my trauma rotation there as part of a military medical exchange program. You were unconscious for most of it, but I remember your case specifically because of what happened during the surgery. The conversations around us quieted again as people sensed another revelation coming. What happened? Elena asked, still holding my hand. Dr. Chen looked directly at me. She coded twice on the operating table. Twice we lost her vital signs completely, but both times she fought back. The attending physician said he'd never seen anyone with such a strong will to survive. And when she finally woke up 3 days later, the first thing she asked wasn't about her own condition. It was whether her crew had made it home safely. General Mitchell nodded grimly. That sounds about right. Your co-pilot, Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, told me you insisted on completing the post-mission debriefing from your hospital bed, even though you were barely conscious from the pain medication. Maria? I said softly, the memory hitting me like a physical blow. Is she? She's doing well. Stationed at Fort Campbell now, training the next generation of pilots. She still talks about flying with you. Says you taught her that the mission doesn't end until everyone's accounted for. Dr. Chen wasn't finished. There's something else. After your surgery, while you were recovering, we had a visit from a CIA operative. Very unusual for a routine medical case. He wouldn't give us details, but he made it clear that your mission that night involved more than just a standard rescue operation. The room had gone completely silent again. Even the catering staff had stopped moving, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. General Mitchell's expression became carefully neutral. Some military operations remain classified, even years later. But Dr. Chen pressed on. The operative mentioned that intelligence gathered during your rescue mission led to the capture of a high-value Taliban commander. He said your decision to stay on station for those extra 40 minutes, the decision that nearly got you killed, allowed special forces to extract critical intelligence that saved hundreds of lives in subsequent operations. I felt the weight of dozens of stares, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. These people were beginning to understand that the woman they'd dismissed as a failure had lived through experiences they could barely imagine. You never told us any of this, Elena said, her voice barely a whisper. I couldn't, I replied. Some things are classified, and some things are just too heavy to carry into civilian conversations. How do you casually mention over family dinner that you spent 4 years making split-second decisions that determined whether soldiers lived or died? That's when Ryan's uncle stepped forward, a man I'd noticed earlier but hadn't been introduced to. He was younger than General Mitchell, maybe 55, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Colonel Jack Brennan, U.S. Marine Corps, retired, he introduced himself with a firm handshake. I served 3 tours in Afghanistan, mostly in Helmand Province. I heard about the Kandahar extraction. It became legendary among the aviator community. They called it the Phoenix Mission, because someone rose from the ashes that night. Phoenix was my call sign, I confirmed. I know what I didn't know until tonight was that Phoenix was here in Chicago, working at an insurance company. Colonel Brennan shook his head in disbelief. Do you have any idea how many pilots tried to recruit you for private security firms after you left the service? Your reputation in military aviation circles is... Well, let's just say when pilots want to tell stories about impossible missions, your name comes up. Derek, who'd been standing quietly in shock, finally found his voice. I don't understand. If you're this famous military pilot, why are you working at an insurance company? Why aren't you flying for airlines or military contractors? It was a fair question, and one I'd wrestled with for 3 years. Because after what I experienced in Afghanistan, the idea of flying passenger jets or corporate helicopters felt empty. I needed time to figure out who I was outside of the cockpit. The insurance job gave me that time. But surely you could have done anything, Madison said, her earlier mockery completely forgotten. With your record, with recommendations from people like General Mitchell? I could have, I agreed. But having options and being ready to use them are 2 different things. When you spend years in a heightened state of alertness, where every decision has life or death consequences, transitioning to civilian life isn't just about finding a job. It's about learning how to exist in a world where the stakes feel simultaneously too low and too overwhelming. Dr. Chen nodded with understanding. Combat, PTSD. I've seen it in dozens of veterans. The hypervigilance, the difficulty adjusting to routine civilian stressors, the feeling that nothing in the civilian world matters as much as what you left behind. Exactly, I said, grateful that someone understood. For 3 years, I've been learning how to live in a world where my biggest daily challenge is helping someone understand their auto insurance deductible instead of extracting soldiers from hostile territory. It's been an adjustment. Colonel Brennan studied me carefully. And now, have you figured out who you are outside the cockpit? I looked around the room, at Elena in her wedding dress, at General Mitchell still standing at respectful attention, at all these people who'd spent the evening seeing me as a failure and were now trying to reconcile that image with the stories they'd just heard. I'm starting to, I said honestly. Tonight helped. That's when something unexpected happened. A young man in a server's uniform approached our group, clearly nervous but determined. He couldn't have been more than 22, with the kind of earnest expression that suggested he was about to say something important. "Excuse me," he said, addressing me directly. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't help overhearing. My name is Tyler Jackson, and I'm working here tonight to help pay for college." "That's very admirable," I said, wondering where this was going. "The thing is," Tyler continued, "I'm studying aerospace engineering at Illinois Institute of Technology, and I've been trying to get into the Army's flight training program for 2 years. Every recruiter I've talked to says my test scores aren't high enough, that I don't have the right background." He paused, gathering courage. "But hearing your story tonight, you were studying aerospace engineering too, weren't you, before you enlisted?" "I was," I confirmed. Could you maybe give me some advice about the application process, about what they're really looking for in pilot candidates?" The request caught me off guard. For 3 years, I'd been so focused on moving away from my military identity that I'd never considered I might have something valuable to offer people trying to follow a similar path. "Tyler," I said slowly, "what's your biggest challenge with the application process?" "Honestly, the flight aptitude test. I've taken it twice and scored just below the minimum, but I know I can do this. I've been taking civilian flight lessons, I have my private pilot's license, I understand the mechanics of flight better than most of the other candidates." General Mitchell stepped closer to our conversation. "Commander Torres, if I may, your flight school instructors used to say you had an intuitive understanding of aircraft systems that couldn't be taught. You could feel what a helicopter needed before the instruments told you there was a problem." An idea began forming in my mind. "Tyler, when is your next test date?" 3 weeks from now. It's my last chance. If I don't pass this time, I'll age out of the program." I looked at him, this earnest young man with dreams of serving his country, working a catering job to pay for college, facing the same choice between safety and service that I'd faced 7 years ago. For the first time in 3 years, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. A sense of purpose that had nothing to do with my own healing and everything to do with helping someone else achieve their dreams. "Give me your contact information," I said. "I think I might be able to help you prepare." The smile that spread across Tyler's face was worth more than all the recognition and respect I'd received that evening, because at that moment I realized something important. My story didn't end when I left the military. It was just beginning a new chapter. Tyler had barely finished writing down his phone number when another voice cut through our conversation, this one carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to boardroom negotiations. "Excuse me, Rebecca." The woman approaching was impeccably dressed in a charcoal designer suit, her silver hair styled in a sharp bob that screamed executive power. "I'm Victoria Caldwell, Ryan's aunt and CEO of Caldwell Aerospace Solutions." I recognized the name immediately. Caldwell Aerospace was one of the largest defense contractors in the Midwest, specializing in helicopter modifications and pilot training systems. Their logo was on half the military aircraft I'd flown. "Miss Caldwell," I said, uncertain where this conversation was heading. "I've been listening to your story with great interest," she continued, her business acumen evident in every word. "Particularly the part about your flight training expertise and your current employment situation." Elena stepped closer, protective instincts kicking in. "Aunt Victoria, Rebecca's had a long evening." "It's fine," I assured my sister, curious about where this was going. Victoria pulled out a business card with practiced efficiency. "I'll be direct, Rebecca. We've been looking for a senior flight instructor for our military contractor training program. Someone with real combat experience, not just simulation expertise. Someone who can teach our civilian pilots what it actually means to fly in hostile environments. The offer hung in the air like a challenge. Around us, conversations had quieted again as people sensed another significant moment unfolding. The position pays significantly more than... Victoria paused delicately. Your current role. It would involve designing a curriculum for pilots transitioning from civilian to military contract work, supervising advanced flight simulations, and occasionally flying demonstration missions. Colonel Brennan nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of role your skills are suited for, Rebecca, teaching the next generation while staying connected to aviation. There's more, Victoria continued. We've been awarded a contract to develop a new pilot training program specifically for special operations aviation. The military wants instructors who've actually flown the missions our students will eventually face. Your Kandahar experience makes you uniquely qualified. I felt a familiar flutter in my chest, the same feeling I'd gotten years ago when challenging missions came down the pipeline. But this time, instead of fear mixed with adrenaline, it was excitement mixed with possibility. When would you need an answer? I asked. Take your time, Victoria said with a knowing smile. But I should mention that Tyler here wouldn't be the only young person you'd be helping. We work with military recruiters to identify promising candidates who need additional preparation. Think of it as bridging the gap between civilian aviation and military service. Tyler's eyes went wide. You mean there are programs like that? There will be if Rebecca accepts the position, Victoria confirmed. We've been waiting for the right person to develop and lead such a program. That's when Dr. Chen spoke up again. Rebecca, there's something else you should know. After tonight, after seeing how you've handled your transition challenges, I'd like to discuss another opportunity with you. Amanda, Elena said with gentle warning, maybe we should let Rebecca process one offer at a time. No, it's related, Dr. Chen insisted. Northwestern Memorial has been developing a new program for treating combat veterans with PTSD. We're looking for someone who's experienced both the trauma and the recovery process to help design treatment protocols that actually work. She pulled out her own business card, not as a patient, Rebecca, but as a consultant. Someone who can help us understand what veterans really need during transition, what works and what doesn't. Your insights could help hundreds of soldiers. General Mitchell's expression showed genuine interest. That's exactly the kind of program the VA needs more of. Too many good soldiers get lost in the transition because the people treating them have never experienced combat themselves. I looked around at all these successful people who, an hour ago, had seen me as Elena's disappointing sister, now offering me opportunities I'd never imagined. But it wasn't the career prospects that moved me most. It was the possibility of turning my struggles into something that could help others. Can I ask you something? I said to the group. All of you have been incredibly kind tonight, but I need to understand. Is this because of my military service, or because you genuinely think I'm qualified for these roles? Victoria Caldwell's laugh was sharp and professional. Rebecca, I didn't become CEO of a defense contractor by making charitable hiring decisions. Your combat experience is valuable, yes, but what makes you truly qualified is how you've handled the transition. You took a job that was beneath your qualifications because you needed time to heal. You've spent 3 years learning how to function in civilian life. That combination of military expertise and civilian adaptation is exactly what we need. Dr. Chen nodded in agreement. In medicine, we call it lived experience. You understand both the problem and the solution from a perspective that textbooks can't teach. Tyler, who'd been listening intently, raised his hand like he was in class. Could I ask something? Rebecca, when you were struggling with the transition, what helped the most? The question was simple, but it cut straight to the heart of everything I'd learned about healing. Honestly, having a purpose that mattered but wasn't overwhelming. At the insurance company, I could help people solve problems without carrying the weight of life or death decisions. It gave me space to process what I'd experienced while still feeling useful. That's exactly what our veterans need, General Mitchell said with conviction. Graduated responsibility. A way back into meaningful work that doesn't throw them directly back into high-stress environments. As I listened to this conversation, something shifted inside me. For 3 years, I had thought of my time at the insurance company as a retreat from my real life, a necessary but temporary step backward. But maybe it hadn't been a step backward at all. Maybe it had been exactly what I needed to become the person who could take on these new challenges. Victoria, I said, turning to address Ryan's aunt directly, this training program you're proposing, would there be flexibility to incorporate mental health support? Transition counseling? Absolutely. In fact, that's been one of our biggest challenges. We can teach people to fly, but we haven't been successful at helping them adjust to the psychological demands of contract work in dangerous environments. Quote, and Tyler, I continued, looking at the young server who'd started this whole chain of possibilities, would you be interested in being our first test case? Let me help you prepare for that flight aptitude test, and if you pass, maybe you could provide feedback on the training program as it develops. Tyler's smile was so bright it could have powered the entire country club. Are you serious? You'd really help me? I'm serious, but I want something in return. I want you to be honest about what works and what doesn't. If we're going to develop programs that actually help people, we need feedback from the people we're trying to help. Elena, who'd been watching this entire exchange with growing amazement, finally spoke up. Becca, I can't believe this is happening. An hour ago, you were sitting alone at a table in the back, and now you're planning to revolutionize military training programs. Not planning, I corrected. Considering, there's a difference. But even as I said it, I could feel the excitement building. For the first time in 3 years, I was thinking about the future instead of just surviving the present. These people weren't offering me jobs out of pity or military loyalty. They were offering me the chance to use everything I'd learned, both in combat and in recovery, to make a real difference. Colonel Brennan stepped forward with a serious expression. Rebecca, before you make any decisions, there's something else you should know. Something that might influence your choice. The tone of his voice suggested this wasn't going to be another job offer. Around us, the conversations quieted once again as people sensed we were approaching another revelation. What is it? I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know. It's about James Mitchell, General Mitchell's son, the soldier you rescued in Kandahar. Colonel Brennan glanced at General Mitchell, who nodded permission to continue. He's been looking for you for 3 years. Looking for me? The words came out sharper than I intended, but Colonel Brennan's revelation hit like a physical blow. Why? General Mitchell's expression grew somber. James has been struggling with survivor's guilt since Kandahar. He blames himself for the mission that went wrong, for putting you and your crew at risk during the rescue. That's ridiculous, I said immediately. The mission parameters were compromised before we even arrived. Intelligence failures, not field decisions. Quote, you know that, and I know that, Colonel Brennan replied. But James doesn't see it that way. He's been carrying the weight of 8 soldiers' lives, plus yours and your crew's, for 3 years. He's convinced that if he'd made different tactical decisions during the initial insertion, none of you would have been in danger. Dr. Chen leaned forward with professional interest. Classic survivor's guilt. I've seen it in dozens of combat veterans. The rational mind knows the truth, but trauma creates its own logic. Where is he now? I asked, though I wasn't sure I was ready for the answer. General Mitchell hesitated before responding. He's been in and out of VA treatment programs. Currently, he's working with a private therapist in Denver, trying to process what happened. But he's been searching for you specifically because he believes he needs to apologize to you personally before he can move forward. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I'd been struggling to transition back to civilian life, the soldier I'd risked everything to save had been fighting his own battle with the same mission that haunted my dreams. He doesn't need to apologize to me, I said firmly. If anything, I should be thanking him. Elena looked confused. Thanking him? For what? For giving me a mission that mattered, I explained. That night in Kandahar, when everything went wrong and everyone said the rescue was impossible, that was the moment I discovered what I was really capable of. James and his team didn't put me at risk. They gave me the opportunity to be the pilot I'd trained to become. Tyler, who'd been listening with rapt attention, spoke up. So you actually wanted the dangerous missions? I didn't want the danger, I clarified, but I wanted the responsibility. I wanted to know that my skills could make the difference between soldiers coming home or not. That mission was terrifying and almost killed me, but it was also the most important thing I've ever done. Victoria Caldwell nodded with understanding. That's exactly the mindset we need in our training programs. Pilots who understand that the real reward isn't avoiding risk, it's managing risk effectively to accomplish something meaningful. Colonel Brennan pulled out his phone. Rebecca, would you be willing to speak with James? I have his contact information, and I know he'd want to hear directly from you that he doesn't need to carry this guilt. Quote, the request scared me more than any combat mission I'd ever flown. Talking to Captain Mitchell would mean confronting the memories I'd spent 3 years trying to process, dragging them back into the light where they could hurt again. But looking around at this group of people, Elena in her wedding dress, Tyler with his hopeful expression, General Mitchell with his military bearing, I realized that maybe some memories weren't meant to be buried. Maybe they were meant to be transformed into something constructive. Yes, I said quietly, I'll talk to him. Colonel Brennan was already dialing. James, it's Uncle Jack. I'm at Ryan's wedding, and there's someone here who wants to speak with you. He paused, listening. Yes, it's her, Phoenix. He handed me the phone, and suddenly I was holding a conversation I'd imagined 100 times but never thought would actually happen. Captain Mitchell? My voice came out steadier than I felt. Commander Torres. His voice was rough with emotion. I can't believe. I've been looking for you for so long. I know. Your father told me. Ma'am, I need to apologize. Stop, I interrupted. Before you say another word, I need you to listen to me. That mission in Kandahar was not your fault. The intelligence was wrong. The insertion point was compromised, and your tactical decisions under fire were exactly what they should have been. Silence on the other end of the line, then a shaky breath. James, I continued, using his first name deliberately, you and your team didn't put me at risk. You gave me the chance to do what I'd trained my entire career to do. You gave me the opportunity to bring 8 American soldiers home alive. That's not something to apologize for. That's something to be proud of. But you almost died because of our mission. I almost died because I chose to stay on station longer than was safe. That was my decision, based on my assessment of the situation. You didn't make that choice for me. I made it because I believed you and your team were worth the risk. Around me, the wedding reception continued, but our little group had formed its own bubble of intensity. Elena was holding my free hand, tears streaming down her cheeks as she listened to a conversation that was clearly healing something deep inside me. Commander, James said after a long pause, the other soldiers from that mission, we've stayed in touch. Every year on the anniversary, we have a video call to check in with each other. They all want to thank you personally. They don't need to thank me, I said, but I'd like to hear how they're doing. Most of us have struggled with the transition back to civilian life. Peterson started a construction company in Montana. Williams is teaching high school history in Ohio. Rodriguez became a firefighter in Texas. We're all trying to find ways to serve that don't involve combat. The pattern was familiar. Soldiers looking for purpose that mattered without the intensity of warfare, just like I'd been doing for 3 years. James, I said, an idea forming, what are you doing for work now? I'm studying to become a paramedic. Figured if I couldn't save lives in combat anymore, maybe I could save them on the civilian side. The synchronicity was too perfect to ignore. Here was a group of soldiers, all struggling with the same transition challenges I'd faced, all looking for ways to serve their communities. And here I was, being offered opportunities to develop programs that could help people exactly like them. Would you and the others be interested in consulting on a veteran transition program? I asked, glancing at Victoria Caldwell and Dr. Chen. I'm being offered the chance to develop training and support systems for veterans, and I think your perspectives would be invaluable. Victoria stepped closer to the phone. James, this is Victoria Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Aerospace. I'd like to extend that consulting offer to your entire team. We're developing comprehensive programs for veteran transition, and we need input from people who've actually lived through the challenges. Dr. Chen nodded enthusiastically. The medical side, too. We need consultants who understand both the trauma and the recovery process. There was another long pause, then James's voice came back stronger than before. Commander, are you saying you want to turn our shared experience into something that helps other veterans? I'm saying maybe our mission in Kandahar didn't end when you got on my helicopter. Maybe it's still ongoing. Elena squeezed my hand tighter. Around us, I could feel the energy of possibility building. Tyler was grinning like he'd just witnessed a miracle. General Mitchell stood at attention with what looked suspiciously like pride in his eyes. "In that case," James said, his voice finally free of the guilt that had been weighing it down, "Phoenix, this is Ranger 6, ready for orders." Quote, "For the first time in 3 years, I felt like the pilot I used to be. Not because I was running from my civilian life, but because I'd finally found a way to integrate everything I'd learned into something meaningful." "Copy that, Ranger 6. Let's bring everyone home." But as I handed the phone back to Colonel Brennan, I noticed something else happening around the ballroom. The conversation with James had drawn more attention, and people were approaching with expressions that suggested the evening still had more surprises in store. As Colonel Brennan pocketed his phone, I noticed a small crowd gathering around us. But these weren't the same curious onlookers from earlier. These people had the bearing and demeanor that suggested military backgrounds. A woman in her 40s approached first, wearing an elegant navy dress with a small American flag pin on her lapel. Her posture immediately identified her as former military. "Excuse me," she said with quiet authority. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Kim, Air Force Reserve. I couldn't help overhearing your conversation." She gestured to 3 other people behind her. "We're all veterans here tonight, guests of various family members, and we've been watching what's happening with great interest." Behind her stood a man with the weathered look of someone who'd spent years outdoors, a younger woman with the precise movements of someone trained in close combat, and an older gentleman whose bearing screamed senior enlisted. "Master Sergeant Frank Rodriguez, Army Rangers, retired," the weathered man introduced himself. "Served 4 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan." "Staff Sergeant Jennifer Walsh, Marine Corps," the younger woman added. "Military police, 3 deployments." "Command Sergeant Major William Hayes," the older man concluded. 30 years in the Army, just retired last month." Lieutenant Colonel Kim stepped forward. "We've all been struggling with similar transition issues. When we heard about your conversation with Captain Mitchell and these program development opportunities, we wanted to approach you." "About what?" I asked, though I suspected I knew where this was going. Master Sergeant Rodriguez answered, "About creating something bigger than individual programs. What you're describing, training, medical support, transition assistance, sounds like the foundation for a comprehensive veteran support organization." Elena, who'd been listening with growing amazement, spoke up. "Becca, are you hearing this? These people want to work with you to help other veterans." Staff Sergeant Walsh nodded enthusiastically. "The existing programs through the VA are helpful, but they're designed by people who've never served. What you're proposing is different. It's veterans helping veterans, using real experience to solve real problems." Command Sergeant Major Hayes pulled out a business card. "I've been working as a consultant for veteran employment programs since I retired. The biggest issue we face is the gap between military skills and civilian application. Your aerospace training program could be a model for other industries." "Think about it," Lieutenant Colonel Kim continued. "Military personnel transitioning to civilian aviation, medical, construction, education, emergency services, all using the same framework of graduated responsibility and peer support that you're describing." Victoria Caldwell, who'd been listening intently, stepped forward with the excitement of someone seeing a major business opportunity. "This is exactly what the defense industry needs. Not just individual training programs, but a comprehensive system for veteran transition that can be scaled across multiple sectors." Dr. Chen was equally animated. "And the medical research possibilities. Studying what works across different transition programs, developing evidence-based protocols, creating a model that other medical centers could replicate." Tyler raised his hand tentatively. "Could I ask something? If you create all these programs, would there be opportunities for people like me? People who want to serve but need help preparing?" Command Sergeant Major Hayes smiled at the young man. "Son, what you're describing is exactly what we need. Bridge programs that help civilian candidates understand military culture and expectations before they commit to service." "It's not just about military service either," Staff Sergeant Walsh added. "Emergency responders, medical personnel, Teachers working in challenging environments. Lots of civilian careers require the same kind of mental resilience and teamwork that military training develops. As I listened to this conversation, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my last day in uniform, the sense of being part of something larger than myself, something that could make a real difference in people's lives. You're talking about a complete ecosystem, I said slowly, the scope of it beginning to sink in. Training, support, employment placement, ongoing mentorship. Exactly, Lieutenant Colonel Kim confirmed. And you'd be uniquely qualified to lead it. Combat experience, transition experience, training expertise, and now connections to both the defense industry and medical community. General Mitchell, who'd been observing this entire exchange with growing interest, finally spoke up. What you're describing already has support in military leadership circles. The Pentagon has been looking for innovative approaches to veteran transition for years. A program led by veterans with proven results would likely receive significant backing. Elena grabbed my arm with excitement. Becca, do you realize what's happening? You came to my wedding as my sister who works at an insurance company, and you're leaving as someone who's about to revolutionize veteran services. But it was Tyler who asked the most important question. Rebecca, are you going to do it? I looked around at all these faces. Elena radiant in her wedding dress, Tyler hopeful about his future, Victoria calculating business possibilities, Dr. Chen envisioning medical breakthroughs, and 5 veterans ready to transform their shared struggles into solutions for others. 3 hours ago, I'd been sitting alone at a table in the back of this ballroom, convinced that my best days were behind me. Now I was surrounded by people who saw my future not as a retreat from my military service, but as its natural evolution. Yes, I said, the word coming out stronger and more certain than I'd expected. I'm going to do it. The cheers that erupted from our group drew attention from across the ballroom. Elena threw her arms around me, tears streaming down her face. Tyler pumped his fist in the air like his team had just won the championship. Even General Mitchell allowed himself a rare smile. But, I continued as the celebration quieted, I'm not doing it alone. If we're going to build something that actually works, it needs to be designed by veterans, for veterans, with ongoing input from the people we're trying to serve. Lieutenant Colonel Kim extended her hand for a firm shake. Consider us your founding board of directors. And consider Caldwell Aerospace your first corporate partner, Victoria added. Northwestern Memorial will support the medical research component, Dr. Chen confirmed. Master Sergeant Rodriguez grinned. Looks like we've got ourselves a mission, people. Quote. As the group began exchanging contact information and discussing next steps, I felt Elena slip her hand into mine. I'm proud of you, she whispered. I've always been proud of you, but tonight I finally understand why. What do you mean? You didn't just serve your country in Afghanistan, Becca. You've been serving people your whole life, even when you thought you were just answering insurance calls. And now you're going to serve veterans who need exactly what you needed 3 years ago. I looked across the ballroom at the elegant wedding reception, at all the successful, accomplished people who'd initially seen me as Elena's disappointing sister. Some of them were still staring, but their expressions had completely changed. Where there had been pity or dismissal, I now saw respect, curiosity, even admiration. But their approval didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the work ahead. The veterans who needed support, the young people like Tyler who needed guidance, the programs that needed to be built from the ground up by people who understood both the challenges and the solutions. You know what the best part is? I said to Elena as the band began playing again and wedding guests started returning to their conversations. What? For 3 years, I thought my military service was something I needed to recover from. Tonight, I realized it was something I needed to grow into. Tyler appeared at my elbow, grinning broadly. So when do we start training for my flight test? Tomorrow, I said without hesitation. But first, you're going to help me write the curriculum for the program that's going to help the next 1,000 people like you. As the evening wound down and wedding guests began saying their goodbyes, I stood in the same ballroom where I'd started the night feeling invisible and unwanted. But everything had changed, not because of other people's recognition, but because I'd finally recognized myself. The woman in the thrift store dress was gone. In her place stood someone ready to build something meaningful from the pieces of her past. Someone who understood that the greatest missions aren't the ones that test your limits. They're the ones that help other people discover their own. Elena's wedding had given her a new beginning with the man she loved. Unexpectedly, it had given me something too, the clarity to see that my story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.